Good morning, everyone. Is this being amplified? All right, then I will do you a favor and not sing. All right, good morning. My name is David Komerofsky, as it says right up there, and I put this on there so that you know that this is custom made just for today. I mean, if I use it again, I'll change the slide, but this is the premiere. Anti-Semitism is a chronic disease. It's not a chronic disease of the Jewish people because there's nothing we can do to treat it. But what I want to walk through with you this morning, and we will have time for some discussion as well, I'm going to do a little overview of what is anti-Semitism, my understanding of why there is anti-Semitism, and what humanity can do about it. Not what humanity will do about it, but we, and my people, we like to say, we never say there's no chance. We never say there's no hope. We can say there's no chance, but we never say there's no hope. So we continue on. The word anti-Semitism doesn't tell the whole story. Because how many of you meet, you meet Semites? I'm anti these people. You can be anti-terror, you can be anti-drugs, you can be anti-violence, but how many Semites do you meet? The Semites are an ethnic group, and Jews are among the Semites. So sometimes, rather callously, people say, well, if you hate Jews, you must hate Arabs also. No, there are plenty of people who do hate both Jews and Arabs. But anti-Semitism technically is this word, Judenhass. It always sounds better when it's in German, for some reason. Judenhass really cuts it. Anybody here speak German? Do you know what Judenhass means? Hatred of the Jews. Just like Islamophobia is misleading. I'm afraid of Muslims. No, it's hatred of Muslims. So let's call it what it is. It is the hatred of Jews. But why? Who are these Jewish people? That's me channeling my Jerry Seinfeld. Who are these Jewish people? So we have to start before we can be anti something. We have to know what it is that we're anti. Judaism is a religion. It has all of the trappings of a religion. We have a system of beliefs. We have this book, basically 5 books of the Torah, and then the books of what Christians call the Old Testament. And we know that we have it because it's the greatest story ever told. It's sold probably more even than Harry Potter, and has been translated into every language. And Judaism continues to be practiced as a religion. But Judenhass is not the hatred of the Jewish religion. What's to hate about people who just, if anybody should hate the Jewish religion, it's Jews, because the services are so long and we don't understand what language they're in, and the religious components require us not to eat certain things that apparently are the staple of every breakfast menu in North America. And some of your classier restaurants, the first time that I went to Bender's, I realized, wait a second, this place isn't kosher. Because everybody kept saying, have the shrimp, have the shrimp. The shrimp will be fine. Judaism is also a number of ethnicities. It's not just one. So when you think of Jewish people, I happen to be ethnically Ashkenazi, which means that the country that kicked out my relatives was in Central Europe, or Eastern Europe. There are also Sephardic Jews who come from Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking lands. There are Mizrahi Jews who come from the Middle East. There are Jews from the Far East. There are Jews from Ethiopia. There are Jews from Youngstown. There's all these different ethnicities. But Judenhass is not just hatred of the ethnic components of Judaism, though there is some of that. But we get a skewed view in the United States of what the Jewish ethnicities are, because the vast majority of North American Jews are Ashkenazi, which means that we followed the American dream of leaving places in Central and Eastern Europe, largely after 1881, when there were a series of pogroms in Eastern Europe. And between 1881 and 1921, millions of Jews came to the United States. Most of them moved into one block in the Lower East Side of New York. The rest of us scattered out to other places. But that's not the totality of the Jewish ethnicities. Judaism is a culture. When you think of American culture, what foods do you think of as being quintessentially American? Apple pie, hot dogs, hamburgers, frankfurters, hamburgers, very American. Chinese food that comes in a little box that you can disassemble, it has a little wire handle. Happy Meals, that's right. Anything that you can get handed to you through a window into your window of your car. So there are cultural aspects of Judaism as well, which we have to distinguish from the religious aspects of Judaism, because Judaism is at once a culture and a religion. I'm in a Presbyterian church. What is Presbyterian food? Covered dish. And also, the joke works for Lutherans. It really works for any of the Reformed churches. What's Jewish food? Well, it's the cultural and the ethnic things like Ashkenazi foods, bagels and lox and cream cheese and herring and all the things that have slowly been killing us at a faster rate than the rest of the world. I have a friend who always jokes, if you want to kill the Jewish people, leave us alone for 100 years. Leave us alone for 100 years and we'll take care of it ourselves. So there are cultural aspects so I point this out to show that it is more than a religion. It is a nation dating back to biblical times. And we have to make a distinction between the Israelite nation of antiquity and the modern state of Israel, because it's not an unbroken connection. But described in Scripture, it's the Israelite nation, or Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. But it was one of the nations. The Israelites were a number of ites in the ancient Near East: Hittites, Jebusites, Amalekites, Amorites. You don't see too many of them around anymore. Judaism remains and has remained a nation even when it did not have a politically sovereign territory. The nation has continued because Judaism, I think, is best described as a people. Now, you want to see what's miraculous, and somebody says, what's Judaism's secret to survival? That's it. The secret to survival is being a people, because there are lots of other peoples, there are a lot of other religions and ethnicities and cultures and nations that are as old as or older than the Jewish people. Chinese culture, Indian culture. What's the difference? Where did Chinese culture flourish? In China. Where did Indian culture, or does Indian culture flourish? In India. Jewish culture flourished in the land of Israel and then in exile. From the year 70 of the Common Era, so 1,954 years ago this August, in Tisha B'Av, the Jewish people was exiled. There have always been some Jews in the land of Israel, but this peoplehood has been able to exist apart from a geographic place. That's the secret to Jewish survival. It also is why so many people misunderstand and hate Jews, because Judaism is like water. It finds its level, and Judaism transforms itself depending on the circumstances in which Jewish people find ourselves. Finally, described by Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan in the mid-20th century, Judaism is a civilization. It's a whole way of life that is compatible with being part of other civilizations. You can be an American Jew. You can be a Chinese Jew. You You can be an Israeli Jew. Once upon a time, you could be an Iraqi Jew or a Syrian Jew and have multiple identities with Judaism being part of that, but always feeling a sense of being part of a people and a big civilization. What's not on this list? Race. Judaism is not a race. Jews are cut across all racial divides. And you may think, I've never met a black Jew. Well, they've never met you either. Doesn't mean they don't exist. Judaism is not a race. Do you think Judaism is a minority? Let's play a game. What's the total population of the world today? 7.5 billion people, something like that. What percentage of the world would you guess is Jewish? 2%? Less than 1% of the world is Jewish? 1/4% of the world's population is Jewish. Now let's compare that. How many Catholics are there in the world? More than 1 billion. There are more than 1 billion people in China. There are more than 1 billion people in India. There are more than 1 billion Muslims. And there's some overlap there because there are Chinese Muslims and there are Catholic Indians and so forth. Jews are less than 1/4% of the world's population, which means that if you had a global village of 100 people representing all of the world, about 20 of them would be Muslim, about 20 would be Catholic, about 20 would be Chinese, about 20 would be Indian, and one little person standing in the corner, 1/4 of one of those people. You can pick your quadrant. I'll take from here to here. This chunk of that person is Jewish. Now, 2% is the percentage of Jews in the United States, roughly. And the percentage of Jews in the world is shrinking. As the general population, including Jews, as the general population grows and Jews remain at a 0 birth rate, there's a larger gap there. So as there's more people and fewer Jews, or even the same number of Jews, we shrink. So why all the attention on Jews? There are so few of us. You know how many Jews there are in Stark County? First, they're all related to each other. That's the most important thing you have to do. Take a guess how many Jews you think. 300 in Stark County? We got 500. I feel like I'm an auctioneer. This is exciting. Can I get 600? Can I get some? 501? One Jew. But she spends half the year in Florida. My guess is there are about 1,000 Jews in Stark County. This is not too bad. Most in Canton, but there are Jews in Massillon and Alliance and other places. Cleveland has between 80 and 100,000 Jews. Akron has maybe 2,000 or 3,000. But we're an insignificant numerical minority. And this is also why there's hatred of Jews. And what leads to conspiracy theories about there must be something about the Jews. There's so few of them, but we can't get away from them. Where are they finding us? Well, there's no Jewish conspiracy to run the world. The secret is education. There was a time in most, I don't know, maybe Michael might be too young, most of our lifetimes, you're definitely too young, when Jews were the highest achieving minority in the United States. Because most Jews were at most third generation, most were second generation or first generation. And the emphasis was on learning and education and training. And in the 1970s, that changed to the highest achieving minority of Southeast Asians. And there's a lot more Southeast Asians than there are Jews. But it doesn't take a great leap of imagination to see people thinking, they're only 1/8 of 1% of the world's population, and yet they're Mark Zuckerberg, Harvey Weinstein, we don't want him anymore. Jeffrey Epstein, we never wanted him. I hate it when they have obviously Jewish, ethnically Jewish names. Like, why can't their names be John Smith? And my apologies if any of you is named John Smith. Well, what's the trick? High achievement based on education and learning, which is coming back to bite us in the rear right now. Because what was the key to success and upward advancement in the United States was education, and where is it the least safe right now in the United States to be a Jew? College campuses. The key to the American dream, that door slammed shut, and I bet it was creaking shut for a long time. I'm going to skip this video here, but I broke it. That'll do it. Let's see if this works. Anybody have a cat with them? We can entertain ourselves. The next slide has a video that we're going to skip. Yeah, we're going to skip that. Okay, I want to define a few things, because my goal today is first not to make any new anti-Semites. That's my goal every day when I wake up. My wife says, what do you have on tap today? I say, the first thing that I'm going to do is not make anybody hate Jews. They can hate me as an individual, but I don't want to be grouped in with everybody else. Anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism. So consider all of those things that I described, the Jewish people being a religion, a nation, a culture, ethnicity, and so forth. This is from Miriam Ellman at Syracuse. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated for their religion. In the 19th and 20th centuries, they were hated for their race, which is misleading because Judaism isn't a race, but anti-Semitism is a form of racism. Doesn't mean hatred has to be logical. And today, they are hated for their nation state. So when I say Judaism finds its level, anti-Semitism is this chronic problem because it defies logic. I don't understand how the mind of an anti-Semite works, because which is it? Are we vermin, or do we control the universe? If given the choice, I'll control the universe, but there's an old joke about a man sitting on a train going from Krakow to Warsaw, and he's in the compartment across from another Jewish guy, and the one Jewish guy is reading the Yiddish newspaper, and the other guy is reading an anti-Semitic rag. And the first Jewish guy says, why are you reading that? Don't you know that that's propaganda, it's lies, it's anti-Semitic? And he says, yeah, but it's got some good news in here. You know, I read your story in the Yiddish paper, and this one died, there was a pogrom here, this group hates us, this group thinks we poison the wells. I look in this magazine and we control the banks, we control the media, we control the news. It can take any shape or form, and Jews are the easiest target because there are so few of us being high achievers, that if you decide whatever it is, I hate lawyers, you don't have to look very far to find Jewish lawyers. Not every Jew is an attorney. All of my brothers-in-law, now that I think about it, never the kind that I need at any given moment. You hate your doctor. You hate the president of your bank. Whoever it is that you hate, whoever it is, and we learned this lesson a long time ago in the United States, the best way to keep people down is to convince them that somebody else is to blame for their problems. And who's the easiest target? The Jews. And that's not a new story. Why in the Middle Ages were Jews hated for religion? Yeah, as killers of Jesus. Now, you can get out of anti-Judaism. Just don't be Jewish anymore. If you believe that Judaism is only a religion. So you can joke, this guy converts from Judaism to Christianity, and he can never remember which stream of Protestantism it is that he's connected to. So he goes for a job interview, and the hiring manager says, "So, Mr. Green," his real name was Greenbaum. "So, Mr. Green, you haven't listed your religion here. What's your religion?" And he thinks and thinks and thinks and says, "I'm a Gentile." Anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews based on things that Jews can't do anything about. You can change your religion, but changing your peoplehood, changing your ethnicity, think of it, people can pass. Light-skinned black people are able sometimes to pass. Well, Jews are an invisible minority. Unless you consciously are making people aware of the fact that you're Jewish by wearing the Jewish ritual garments, who knows who's Jewish? So it's sort of like being gay. How many times do people who are gay, who nobody might know it, how often do they hear things that are slurs against gay people because they know that, all the good jokes start like this? Which is why anti-Semitism is such an important topic in churches, because you'll hear things that I won't hear because I'm a rabbi. People don't even know that my name is David. Every time I say, "Call me David," "Okay, Rabbi." Can't escape it. So what is anti-Semitism? The marginalization and oppression of people who are Jewish, based on the belief in stereotypes, myths, and disinformation about Jewish people, about Judaism, and about Israel. Doesn't have to be Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, secular Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews, just Jews in general. Parallel to all systems of oppression, anti-Semitism manifests as the dehumanization or exploitation of, or discrimination or violence against Jewish people. The first time I read this a number of years ago, I thought, that's all in the past. Well, we don't have data for 2024 because we're barely into it. But at the end of 2023, 63% of American Jews said that the status of the Jews in the U.S. is less secure compared to a year ago. 63% of American Jews in December of 2023 said that the status of the Jews in the U.S. is less secure than a year ago. Also, in the end of 2023, 24%, almost a quarter, of current or recent college students felt uncomfortable or unsafe at a campus event because they are Jewish. And 1 in 4 college students avoided wearing, carrying, or displaying things that would identify themselves as Jewish. More than 1 in 5 American Jews experienced anti-Semitism online, and 62% of American Jews reported seeing or hearing anti-Semitism online or on social media in 2023. So anti-Semitism is not some ancient thing that we've gotten past. Anti-Semitism sometimes targets Jews not as individuals, but as a collective, whether that's Jewish organizations, movements like Zionism, or the Jewish state of Israel. So we're going to get into the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So I like to define things by what they are not. So what is not anti-Semitic? Because if everything is anti-Semitic, then nothing's anti-Semitic. If every day is the Sabbath, then nothing is holy. You have to separate things, and you have to be able to speak truthfully about what things are and what they aren't. Just because we disagree doesn't mean that either one of us is bigoted. Honorable people can disagree honorably. So what is not anti-Semitic? Criticism of the state of Israel that holds Israel to the same standard as every other nation, that recognizes Israel's right to exist as a sovereign nation and doesn't demonize Israel. I'm going to go a little bit more into this. Because a year ago, I would never have conflated anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I held them compartmentalized. I thought it was possible to be anti-Zionist and still not be anti-Semitic. I no longer believe that because of what I've seen since October. So why is Judaism conflated with Israel? I told you that Judaism is a religion, a culture, an ethnicity. It's a nation. I am not a citizen of the state of Israel. I don't have an Israeli passport. I don't vote in Israel. I don't pay taxes in Israel. I'm an American, but I'm a Jew. So why is Judaism conflated with Israel? Why did you ask a rabbi to come instead of a random Israeli off the street? And there are Israelis in Canton. Well, Judaism is conflated with Israel because Judaism is complex and it's more than a religion. It's more than a nation, more than an ethnicity, and more than a culture. It is all of those things. And that's why it's important to differentiate the state of Israel, created in 1948, from biblical Israel. Because we are right now living in an exceptional moment in history. I mentioned earlier, using the models of India and China as two ancient civilizations that continue to flourish and continue to write history within a sovereign nation. Now, India has only been sovereign since 1947, but Indian culture has been flourishing for thousands of years. Does anybody think that India shouldn't exist? Do you see protests on college campuses against Pakistan? Why not? Pakistan was part of India, and it was carved out for Muslims to be separate from Hindus. Why is either one of those states legitimate? They are 20th century imperialist creations. India was the crown jewel of the British Empire. The King of England was the Emperor of India. So hold on to that thought for a moment. Judaism has existed in exile for thousands of years as a thorn in the side of everybody else because we don't fit neatly into a category. Reform Judaism, the stream of Judaism of which I am an adherent, did away with the national piece of Jewish identity in the 19th century and said Judaism is just a religion, and then changed its mind in the 1930s with the rise of Nazism and said, no, we've got to wake up. Just because we think we're German, we think we're French, we think we're Polish, doesn't mean that we're accepted. We have to have some kind of internal locus of control and accept and embrace that Judaism that is distinct, it's different. And there are always going to be people who don't like the fact that it continues to exist. Why this is an exceptional moment in history is because this is the first time since the Hanukkah story, since the Maccabees in the 2nd century BCE, when there has been a Jewish army, where there has been Jewish sovereignty. So I contend that this moment is exceptional because for 2,000 years, governments could slaughter Jews wholesale without consequences. And what changed in 1948 is there's a price to pay. Remember 1976, the raid on Entebbe? There's a price to pay if an airliner is hijacked and Jews are separated from the rest of the passengers and held hostage. This is an exceptional moment in history, and we shouldn't lose sight of that a people that dwelt apart, and that's how Exodus begins, that there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph and enslaved the children of Israel. Remember why he enslaved the children of Israel? They were too numerous. The Hebrew says had grown too numerous mimenu, meaning at our expense. And the Pharaoh was concerned lest Egypt should go to war against another country, another empire, and the Jews should ally with the enemy. The charges of dual loyalty have been around from the beginning. So I want to touch for a moment on the beginnings of rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, because we have to be open about the fact that Jewish-Christian relations have not always been positive. And there's a reason for that. And I think that we're beyond the initial distinction. When I said anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the beginnings of Christianity were anti-Jewish. That doesn't mean that Christians wanted Jews massacred. It means that ideologically, there was a difference. So we have the ancient Near East, the biblical Judaism and the temple in Jerusalem, all those judges and prophets and all those people who were so fun to be around. And then comes the first century of the Common Era, when so much, we think there's a lot of news today about the first century of the Common Era. What happened? Jesus of Nazareth, a Jewish preacher who was born and lived and died as a Jew, born into a fight between Jews. Remember I said, leave the Jews alone for 100 years, we'll take care of it. The fight in the first century between the Sadducees and the Pharisees was the fight between the priests and the rabbis over the future of Judaism. And then the temple was destroyed because Jews were fighting with each other and were at each other's throats. King Herod, who had been invited in because after the Hanukkah story, after the Jews in the 2nd century BCE couldn't get along with each other after the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty, the Roman Empire was invited in to come keep the calm. And then in the 2nd century, at the temple that Herod had built, the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate, was trying to quell an uprising. And then less than a generation later, in the year 70, the temple is destroyed because the Sadducees and the Pharisees are fighting with each other. This is an interesting side note. One of the reasons why Hamas was able to do what it did on October 7th, because where was Israeli public attention? Fighting each other. I mentioned the raid on Entebbe a few moments ago. The Israeli hero of the raid on Entebbe was Yonatan Netanyahu, whose younger brother is the Prime Minister of Israel. And the harsh critics of Benjamin Netanyahu have stated that one brother sacrificed himself for his country, and the other is in the process of sacrificing his country for himself. Now, is that anti-Semitic? It's coming from Israel. Show me another place in the Middle East where you can openly protest and criticize your government and go home at night. So in that first century, with the Jews fighting with each other, Judaism could have disappeared. It didn't. Something new grew in two directions. One direction was Christianity, that the earliest followers of Jesus who were Jewish, and then around the turn of the first century, the gospel writers, created Christianity that grew out of these roots of the ancient Near East and biblical Jerusalem. But what happened to the Jews? Rabbinic Judaism was formed. So I don't like to think of Judaism as a parent religion to Christianity. Rabbinic Judaism, which is still practiced today, that's why I'm a rabbi and not a priest. Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity are siblings with the same parent, and that parent is biblical Judaism. So the early church being anti-Jewish was in order to distinguish itself, partly for itself, but also for Jews and for Romans, and for pagans living under the Roman Empire, to distinguish Judaism from Christianity. As soon as it became clear that the Jews were not worth the effort, the conversion, that it was much easier to convert Gentiles than Jews. That's why we only get one of the books, Hebrews, only one epistle. You'd think Paul was a good Jew. He should have known better. You can't convince the Jewish people with one book. Spending all this time on Galatians and Philippians and all these other people. Go bother the Jews again. So, anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, which I have to distinguish from anti-Judaism, because I don't expect Christians and Muslims to embrace Judaism and Judaism's theology and practices. That is what makes us distinct and different, and we need that. If we're all the same in the way that we do things, where's the fun in that? It was iron sharpens iron, that we have to have distinctions. And anti-Semitism and anti-Israel and anti-Zionism are what we experience today as the real threat to the Jewish people. So I'm going to give you Natan Sharansky's 3D test, and some of you have heard me say this before. Natan Sharansky was born in the Soviet Union. He's probably close to 80 by now, but Sharansky was a Soviet prisoner of conscience, and then he was a member of the Israeli parliament, and then he was the chair of the Jewish Agency for Israel. Now he's retired. Sharansky's like this tall. He's brilliant. He's the one who told Reagan to tell Gorbachev to tear down the wall. Sharansky's 3D test about legitimate criticism of Israel that is not anti-Semitic, as he says, criticism that delegitimizes Israel, that demonizes Israel or holds Israel to a double standard, that's anti-Semitic. Because I gave you the Pakistan example, so I'll bring it even closer to home. Anyone here have Native American tribal ancestry? Maybe some. Anybody interested in finding the people who used to live on your land that you own in Stark County? You interested in going to the Iroquois Nation and saying, I got this illegitimately. Yes, I have a deed, and I made the down payment, and I've been paying my mortgage every month. And yes, there was a Revolutionary War. And yes, there were treaties that the United States broke, but I feel personally responsible. This is your land. Are you willing to do that? Why should Israel? Land, we can live in dream world. How does land transfer? Through purchase, through theft, or through war? They all happen. When I lived in Texas, they gave the example of Six Flags, which is, it's no Geauga Lake. Why is it called Six Flags? Because Texas has existed as Texas under Six Flags. It was part of Spain, it was part of France, it was part of the Confederacy, it was part of, it was its own republic, it was part of the United States, and then one other that I can never remember. Mexico, yes. Yeah, I should know that. There's right there. It's 100 miles away. The land didn't change, but the ownership changed. Is Texas legitimately a part of the United States? When I lived there, I had questions some days. Sometimes I wondered if it was Earth, but that's because I'm from Ohio. But Texas has every right to exist. Texas is the only one of the 50 United States to be annexed by treaty. as opposed to being absorbed into the United States. And Texas could at any time vote to secede again and break up into 5 countries or 5 states. We'll see, the year is still young. So delegitimizing is different than criticizing. That's why Zionism was a political movement in the 19th century that was a response to anti-Semitism. Jews do not live apart from the world. Living in Europe and elsewhere around the world, Jews were excluded from being fully a part of these various countries, and a number of intellectuals came up with the idea, well, they keep telling us, go back where you came from. Let's go back where we came from. So Zionism as a political idea is a form of 19th century nationalism. And now there is a state of Israel. We can't rewind. So being anti-Zionist today means nothing more than saying the state of Israel isn't legitimate. The Jews don't have a right to a state. So these are the things to consider with demonizing and double standards. Does the Jewish people have a right to a state? Well, it's more than a religion. Are there countries that have one religion? Vatican's. Are there countries that have established religions? Oh yeah. Most of them. None of them Jewish. Does Israel have a right to exist? If you say no, then that requires that introspection, and I have to think, why not? Is it because of everything that I've heard about Jews? Is it because I had a negative interaction with one Jewish person? That these people don't have a right to, this state doesn't have a right to exist? Is criticism Israeli policy anti-Semitic? Well, there are ongoing protests in Israel by Israeli citizens. So no, policies are different than the right to exist. And then ask, why does the United States support Israel? What would an anti-Semite say? They control everything. I don't know why I feel the need, guys. Maybe because I lived so close to Kentucky for all those years in Cincinnati. The people who would sell me the Everclear at the liquor store, I just assumed they didn't like me. Why does the United States support Israel? A democratic ally in the Middle East. Now, here's toughies. What should Israel do in response to Hamas terrorist attacks? Now, here's where it gets crunchy, because I don't want to see innocent people killed. Does it make a difference to the innocent person who is killed, whether they are killed by Israeli rockets or Hamas terrorists? No, it doesn't make any, you're just as dead. Does it make a difference to the grieving parent? Absolutely not. Every life is invaluable and irreplaceable, and we have to ask, who is responsible for that? And this is where I say it gets crunchy, because we live in the United States of America. Remember 20 years ago? He doesn't. 21 years ago? Who did our country invade after 9/11? Iraq. Were any Iraqis involved in 9/11? No, where were they from? Saudi Arabia. When did we attack Saudi Arabia? We haven't, because they're our allies. If you're okay with that and not with supporting the state of Israel, given that Saudi Arabia has no equality for men and women, no religious pluralism, there are people in this room who I know understand that Israel has religious pluralism because we walked together into churches in Israel. What would the United States do in such a situation? If we were attacked, if for some reason Michigan decided, we would just secede. We'd say the whole state is yours. But first we'd all have to learn what the heck this nonsense is about with the hand. I try it with Ohio and I can't do it. It's the heart of it all. What if Canada were to cross Lake Erie and start invading, Sandusky? I don't know why I'm on the amusement parks this morning, but I'm ready for the summer. Would Canada exist anymore? Of course not. So why is Israel held to a different standard? So this is why. Consider why historically Jewish blood has been cheap. You could murder Jews wholesale. What happened on October 7th was a pogrom. Pogroms did not just happen in Europe. It was a pogrom, not by a state actor. They're terrorists. These were not militants. These are terrorists, different from a government that is accountable to its citizens. Hamas is the elected government of Gaza. Netanyahu is the elected government of Israel. Does that mean they're perfect? No, but they're also not. I'm no great fan of, this should not come as a surprise to you thus far. I'm no huge fan of Netanyahu. I think he belongs in prison. And there's a significant number of Israelis who agree. Mostly the families of the people whose relatives are still being held in Gaza. But there's a price to pay when once upon a time there wasn't. So, being a Christian ally. First, thank you for inviting me. I spend more time, I joke with my wife, I spent more time in churches in the last 3 months than I do at Temple Israel. And Temple Israel, by the way, says thank you. When I'm not there, I can't create any problems. Because you ask, and I want to be able to provide information and keep lines of communication open. Because the worst thing that happens is when we caricaturize our enemies. On Wednesday night, I'll be at Malone University doing a program with another gentleman from Northeast Ohio whose wife is Palestinian. And he created a nonprofit, not specifically in response to October 7th, but he does on-the-ground relief work in Gaza. So the point of this is not to have a debate, it's to humanize that I'm not interested in seeing Palestinians murdered. He's not interested in seeing Israelis murdered, that we are human beings. And we sometimes think we're powerless in the face of governments and war, but no, we can be allies and speak up. So being a Christian ally, first, anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel is not something that Jews can solve. If we controlled the world, do you think we could at least fix this? It's a human problem, not a Jewish problem. The Jewish people and the Jewish state need allies who can speak for us in areas where we are not welcome. Because there are plenty of places where Jews just aren't welcomed. But Christians have access. And think of my thing earlier about the jokes that begin like this, that speaking up, give the India and Pakistan example. You don't have to change anybody's mind, but getting people thinking, why is it that I have such a problem with Israel? Is it because it dominates the news? Is the news there to make us feel good? Is the news there to inform us? Used to be. What's the news there for now? To get clicks, to generate ad revenue, and objectivity be damned. And there are notable exceptions. But generally, we live in these siloed things where we watch one channel and don't want to hear anything that's outside of that channel. And so we never learn. Be a voice for moderation and avoid demonizing Arabs and Palestinians. If you want to blame anybody for what's going on right now, blame Hamas. All Hamas has to do is release the hostages and the war's over. Because the United States would not allow Israel to continue bombing. Even with Netanyahu's got some, I understand why he wants, while he has the opportunity, like when do you, and this is a crass example, but when do you clean out your garage? When the cars are in there? No. You do it while you have the opportunity. And Netanyahu's window of opportunity is running out. Acknowledge the fear that Jews experience. I walked right in here this morning. Anybody been to Temple Israel in the last 10 years? What do you have to go through? If you're there for a service or a program that's on a schedule, you go through Canton City Police. The door is locked all the time, even to come during the day. You need to be buzzed in. And that's not unique here. That's everywhere. We have for a number of years. Why? Not because we're paranoid. It's because there are threats. Call out anti-Semitism when you see it or hear it from people that you know and respect, especially if the bias is implicit. Because anti-Semitic bias, and I give the example of India, Pakistan, is how often do we think about the legitimacy of countries, but when it's jammed down our throats, and when on college campuses and cities across America, I don't understand why Cleveland City Council should even be considering a resolution about asking for a ceasefire in Israel. I've been to Cleveland. I was in Cleveland last night. They have other issues. Learning how to plow, for example, would be. But Jews on the left were always convinced that anti-Semitism existed on the right, and Jews on the right were always convinced that it was the anti-Semites on the left. No, it's not. AOC and the squad. There are friends. No, it's not. Let me think of who's. Christian evangelicals, they're our friends. There's anti-Semitism and bigotry all over the place. But these are human beings as well, who are educable, and especially people who have influence need to hear. Finally, embrace Jesus' Jewishness. Jesus was not a Palestinian. Palestine didn't exist. It was Israel. It was not the state of Israel, but anybody know which tribe of the 12 tribes Jesus came from? Judah. Because, let me see if I get this right, 14 generations I think there was King David, and then King David's grandmother was Ruth, who was a Moabite, but Boaz, who was King David's grandfather, was from the tribe of Judah. Now, Jesus lived and died as a Jewish person who was a migrant, who was vulnerable, and who would have been subject to the same anti-Semitism as anybody else, as any other Jew today. So don't allow Jesus to be co-opted as something that he was not. He was not an Israeli, he was not a Palestinian, but he was Jewish. And really my last thing is know that showing up means a lot. So thank you for coming out on a Sunday morning for worship, to hear the good news from your clergy in the service, the good spiel. I opened with German, the good spiel, the gospel. But the world is a dangerous place. We can't pretend like it isn't. But neither can we abstain from being involved in the world as it is today. And that means standing up. Thank you. Yes.
I have one. Rabbi Spitzer, at one point, we were all in Israel. This is the first trip. And somebody asked him in the group, Nancy, you may remember this, why the Jews allowed what happened in Germany to happen. And he had a very specific answer, which I just loved, but I have since forgotten. Do you have a hint?
I don't know. Well, I think the simplest answer that I can think of is people didn't believe that it was happening. This is a country that loves us. How could they do this to us? Yeah. Jews did not create the Holocaust. Yeah. Yes.
I'm probably showing my ignorance, but when we went into, I'm not sure where we went into, to that place where we sat around in this little hut and the guys talked to us.
Yes.
Is that one of the ones Who's coming here?
Roots, yeah, they're going to come in the fall. Is that right? Roots, who have.
No, I meant who's going to be at Malone.
No.
That's not the same.
No.
Okay.
This is